What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be doing a full comparison between the new Samsung Galaxy S21 FE and the S20 FE. Now, I still think the S20 FE is one of the best phones Samsung has ever made. I know a ton of you guys have this device, and if you're like me, you've been eagerly awaiting the new S21 FE, which obviously got delayed for whatever reason. It was probably supposed to come out last summer, but looking past that, it's here now, and we definitely need to go over what's new, what's changed, and whether or not it's worth upgrading to. There's obviously a lot to go over here, so I won't waste any more time. Let's just go ahead and get right into it and see how these two phones stack up. Physically, the new S21 FE, I think, is even closer to its flagship counterpart than the S20 FE was. And this means you do get a slimmer, sleeker, more premium looking device overall. Size-wise, I think you can tell that the new S21 FE is a bit smaller now. It's a 6.4 inch device. The S20 FE is 6.5 inches. That's the screen size. And side by side, you can easily see that difference. It's mainly in height. The new S21 FE is a bit shorter, and that might mean that one-handed use is a little easier now. You maybe won't have to stretch your fingers as far as you aim towards the top of the screen. Both phones have really slim bezels all around, about an 85% screen-to-body ratio across the board. No real changes there, though I know some of you did notice the selfie camera is a little bigger on the new S21 FE. It is a better, much improved setup too, actually, and I'll talk more about that a little later. Around back, like I mentioned already, the S21 FE does look quite a bit different compared to the S20 FE. It much more closely resembles the flagship S21. It's nearly identical, actually. Both phones, of course, have the same matte plastic rear housing and aluminum frame. The new S21 FE is a brushed finish. The S20 FE was a shinier and more polished. You also get a more flat and squared off form factor on the new S21 FE. The S20 FE had thinner sides with a tapered design. And in the hand, actually, the S21 FE does feel noticeably lighter too, by some 13 grams or about half an ounce. Both phones remain IP68 water and dust resistant. They both offer fast wireless charging up to 15 watts. And Samsung's reverse wireless charging features as well. Taking a closer look around at everything else, nothing really on the left side of either device, just what looks to be a 5G antenna on the S21 FE. On the right, similarly placed power and volume buttons. Down below, the same USB-C charge port in the middle there, one of two speakers on both phones as well. And on the new S21 FE, the SIM card tray, which was located on top on the S20 FE. But besides the change in placement, there's also a change in what's offered. The new S21 FE does not have expandable storage. The SIM card tray is just that, a SIM card tray, or dual SIM on the unlocked version, like I have here. The S20 FE, of course, had the SIM and SD card slot setup, and I know removing that on the S21 FE is pretty disappointing, so I wanted to make sure I covered it. Up front, the selfie cameras, of course, and secondary speakers in the earpiece on both phones, and around back, triple lens camera setups on both, which again, I'll go more in depth with in just a bit. Underneath the screens, both phones offer an in-display fingerprint reader, and if you were hoping for an upgrade on the new S21 FE, well, unfortunately we didn't get it. This isn't the ultrasonic setup like the flagship phone. To me, both the S21 FE and S20 FE have the same setup with the speed and accuracy. It's perfectly fine, don't get me wrong, but this is one area where the S21 FE falls short compared to the flagship. There's also face unlock on both phones, and once again, the accuracy and unlocking speeds seem to be comparable. The new S21 FE, of course, does have faster, more updated specs, like a better processor, so at times it will be the faster device. There's not really a crazy difference in my opinion with the unlocking. When it comes to the displays, this was, I think, the selling point on the S20 FE, and it's once again a great setup on the new S21 FE. Both phones offer AMOLED panels. The S21 FE now gets the dynamic AMOLED 2X distinction, while the S20 FE had the Super AMOLED display, but besides that, we once again see the same 2400 by 1080 resolution for both phones, a 20:9 aspect ratio, HDR10 Plus support, and 120 Hz for a fast, fluid, and ultra-responsive feel. You do get a slightly better pixel density on the new S21 FE, since it's the same resolution and a slightly smaller form factor, but that's not something you'll really notice. What you will see, however, is how much better the S21 FE's display is in certain areas, particularly with blacks and darker colors. You get deeper, inkier blacks with more detail shown in the shadows, perhaps a bit more vibrant and punchy colors across the board as well. You can of course make slight changes to the display profile yourself to get the the right look, but with the default color profiles right out of the box, there is a slight noticeable improvement to the viewing experience on the new S21 FE. Also, like I said, both phones do offer that 120Hz mode, which makes the phones feel super fast. Now, this isn't necessarily a flagship feature anymore, but it's still great to have. And altogether, the viewing experience paired with that 120Hz mode really makes both devices a great value, all things considered. And the screens, once again, remain a top selling point for either device. Just know that while the S21 FE did get some improvements, the differences are relatively minor. So now let's talk specs and performance. And with this, unfortunately, I think the new S21 FE is at a bit of a disadvantage. So let me explain. The S20 FE is powered by the Snapdragon 865 5G chipset. And at the time of its release in September 2020, that was like an 8-month-old flagship processor, which was another reason why this phone was such a good value. The new S21 FE is powered by the Snapdragon 888 5G chipset, similarly a flagship spec and overall upgrade compared to the S20 FE. You can see that from the Geekbench scores, especially with the single-core score, but the 888 is now an almost 1-year-old processor, and the new 2022 Qualcomm chipsets are likely weeks away from being released. It kind of makes the S21 FE a bit late to the game, and probably 4 to 5 months behind in its release cycle. So not nearly as good of an overall value as before with its specs. You also once again get the choice of either 6 or 8 gigs of RAM and 128 or 256 gigs of storage. That's the same on both phones, but remember, no SD card slot on the new S21 FE. Altogether, while you do get a better processor, it's a bit older when you compare the release cycles, and you lose the SD card slot as well. So while the S20 FE, I think, offered truly same-year flagship specs for a great price, the S21 FE now settles for 1-year-old flagship specs and a removed SD card slot. Now, don't get me wrong, both phones do offer a stellar user experience. With Android 12 and the latest Samsung One UI updates, they're super powerful phones from start to finish. And whether you're a more casual user with just social media and web browsing, or a full-fledged gamer, either phone will be able to handle anything and everything you throw at it, just like a $1,000 flagship device. The speed difference also isn't that noticeable between the two phones. On standard Samsung apps and your usual social media stuff, you likely won't even notice a difference at all. For more graphics-heavy stuff, you'll gain a fraction of a second here and there with the S21 FE, but it's not a huge advantage. I think you'll get better app management on the newer phone though, but overall, the performance upgrades just aren't massive. The toughest part to look past is just how late to the game the S21 FE is. When you start looking at what's upcoming and what you really got with the S20 FE, this is really what holds this new phone back most. Objectively, it is a flagship spec phone with powerful high-end 2021 specs at a relatively more affordable price. But we're in 2022 now. The value just isn't there as much. And that's probably the biggest downside with the new S21 FE. One area where both phones do excel, I'd say, is with battery life. Now, we don't get any major improvements. They're both packing 4,500 milliamp batteries inside and the same 25-watt wired fast charging, which is fine, though I would have liked to have seen something more. The plus side is that my S20 FE was absolutely an all-day phone, and the new S21 FE has served me well so far too. I also think Samsung's Android 12 and One UI updates over the last year have helped, so altogether, either one of these phones should be great for longevity. Sure, faster charging or a bigger battery would have been nice, but all in all, I have no complaints with the S20 FE, and the S21 FE looks to be just as good. Finally, let's talk about the camera setups. And just like most other year-over-year smartphone releases recently, this is another area of noticeable improvement. Starting with a selfie camera, both phones seem to have the same general spec when it comes to the hardware. 32 megapixel shooters up front, f2.2 apertures, but the actual results with some selfie shots indicate some big improvements. On the S21 FE, the pictures look brighter, skin tones look better, there's a ton more detail when you start to look closely. And I don't know if you can equate this to better software, better processing, processing with the Qualcomm chipset, perhaps a different camera setup altogether. But whatever the case may be, selfies look noticeably better on the S21 FE, which is great. Around back, both phones have a triple lens camera setup, and once again, the actual specs seem to be the same. 12 megapixel f1.8 aperture main lenses, 8 megapixel telephoto, 12 megapixel 123 degree ultra wide, and inside the camera app, much of the same sort of features, shooting modes, and capabilities. You miss some flagship stuff like 8K video recording, but I would say this is 85 or 90% of the feature set from a flagship phone. The S21 FE adds dual video recording, which is nice, but besides that, there doesn't seem to be too many other new add-ons or upgrades. Really, once again, it's just the actual results that indicate a better camera setup on the S21 FE, and I think that's fairly noticeable. Again, the improvements might be due to a couple of factors. It's not necessarily better camera hardware, but perhaps better software, better processing. Whatever the case may be, I think you can absolutely expect better pictures on the S21 FE, which is great to see. Overall, the upgrades and changes to the new S21 FE are relatively minor. You get a fresh new design that very much looks like the flagship phone, slightly better display, more powerful processor, better pictures too. Those are all upgrades you'd expect, but the S21 FE does miss out on a couple of things too. It's technically a little smaller, there's no SD card slot, no ultrasonic fingerprint sensor, and no fresh features that really differentiate it. I think if you have the S20 FE, you can likely stick with that phone for another year at least. You're not really going to miss much. And I'll also say that with some of the new phones coming out soon, like the S22, it might just make more sense to wait anyway and see what those phones have in store. All in all, the S21 FE is a good device, but I'm not sure it's a necessary upgrade. And I don't know that it's as good of a value as the S20 FE was when it was released. But what do you guys think? Is the S21 FE something you're maybe considering right now? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys later.